Commander Zethkar stood on the observation deck of Nexus Station, watching another transport ship dock at the massive spaceport. His forearms crossed behind his back as his red eyes studied the new arrivals through the reinforced glass. In his 32 years of service with the Galactic Defense Force, he had seen hundreds of different alien species join their ranks. Some came seeking glory, others ran from their destroyed homeworlds, and many simply wanted steady pay and 3 meals a day. Today was different. Today the humans were arriving. Zethkar had heard stories about this new species from the outer rim territories. They called themselves humans and came from a small blue planet called Earth. Most reports described them as average in almost every way. They were not particularly strong like the rock-skinned Titans. They were not as fast as the bird-like avians. Their technology was decent but nothing special compared to the Crystalline Empire's energy weapons or the Mechanical Collective's advanced armor. So why had High Command specifically requested them for the Defense Force? The docking bay doors opened with a loud hiss. Zethkar activated his translator device and walked down to meet the new recruits. The first human to step off the transport was clearly their leader. He was tall for his species, with dark hair showing gray at the edges, and deep brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His uniform was clean but worn, suggesting years of use. "Commander Zethkar?" the human asked, extending his hand in what Zethkar recognized as their greeting gesture. "Yes. You must be Colonel Martinez." Zethkar carefully shook the human's hand, noting the firm grip. "Jake Martinez, yes, sir. Thank you for having us." The colonel gestured to the group behind him. "This is Captain Lisa Brooks, my second in command." Captain Brooks was shorter than Martinez, with blonde hair pulled back tightly and sharp green eyes. She nodded respectfully but said nothing. Behind her, dozens of human soldiers filed out of the transport in neat lines. They were young and old men and women with different skin colors and features. What struck Zethkar was how quietly they moved, and how their eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. "Follow me," Zethkar said. "We will get you settled and begin orientation immediately." As they walked through the station's corridors, Zethkar noticed how the humans reacted to their new environment. Most species either gawked at the advanced technology or tried to look tough and unimpressed. The humans simply observed everything with calm attention. When they passed a group of wounded Titan soldiers returning from a border skirmish, several humans slowed their pace and watched with what looked like concern. "Rough fight out there?" Colonel Martinez asked Zethkar quietly. "Standard patrol. Conflict with pirates. Nothing serious," Zethkar replied. Martinez nodded, but his eyes lingered on a Titan who was limping badly. "Will they get proper medical care?" The question surprised Zethkar. Most new recruits were too nervous or excited to worry about soldiers from other species. "Of course, our medical bay is fully equipped." "Good." Martinez seemed satisfied and continued walking. They reached the briefing room where Lieutenant Krexta, Zethkar's aide, was waiting with data pads and assignment folders. Krexta was a typical Valonian like Zethkar, but younger and more aggressive. His green scales showed the bright patterns that indicated he was eager for combat. "Humans," Krexta muttered in their native language, thinking the translator would not pick it up. "They look soft, weak. How are these mammals supposed to help us fight?" Several humans glanced in Krexta's direction. Captain Brooks raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Colonel Martinez simply smiled slightly, as if he had heard similar comments before. Zethkar began the standard orientation briefing. He explained the structure of the Galactic Defense Force, their primary enemies, and the basic rules all soldiers were expected to follow. Most species asked questions about weapons, combat pay, or how quickly they could advance in rank. The humans asked different questions. "What are the rules about civilian populations in combat zones?" asked Sergeant Ben Mitchell, a stocky man with several scars on his hands. "Standard protocol is to avoid unnecessary civilian casualties," Zethkar answered. "Define unnecessary," said Private Danny Chen, a young man who looked barely old enough to fight. Zethkar paused. Most species accepted the basic answer. "Well, if civilians are in the way of military objectives, some losses are expected," Several humans exchanged glances. Captain Brooks leaned forward. What about evacuation procedures? Do we have protocols for getting non-combatants to safety before engaging enemy forces? That depends on the tactical situation, Lieutenant Krexta interjected. Sometimes there is no time for evacuations. The mission comes first. More glances between the humans. Colonel Martinez spoke carefully. I understand mission priorities, Lieutenant, but in our experience, protecting civilians often is the mission. Krexta's scales flashed brighter green. Your experience fighting who? Other humans with similar weapons? Wait until you face the Hive Collective or the Shadow Raiders. They do not take prisoners. They do not spare civilians. They consume everything in their path. All the more reason to get innocent people out of the way first, said Private Maria Santos, a woman with calm eyes and steady hands. The briefing continued with more questions about supply lines, medical support for wounded enemies, and rules for treating prisoners of war. Zethkar found himself explaining concepts that most species never bothered to ask about. The humans wanted to know what happened to enemy soldiers who surrendered. They asked about medical care for alien species with different biological needs. They even asked about procedures for handling refugees from destroyed worlds. By the end of the session, Lieutenant Krexta looked frustrated. These mammals are more concerned with playing nursemaid than fighting wars, he said in Valonian. This time, Colonel Martinez responded in perfect Valonian. We have learned that taking care of people and fighting wars are often the same thing, Lieutenant. Krexta's scales went pale with surprise. The humans had understood every word he had said during the briefing. After the other humans were dismissed to their quarters, Colonel Martinez lingered behind. Commander, may I speak freely? Of course. We know our reputation precedes us, small, weak, technologically average. Many species probably wonder why we were invited to join the Defense Force. Martinez looked directly at Zethkar. We may not look like much, but we have been fighting wars on our world for thousands of years. We have learned some hard lessons about what works and what does not. Such as this. You can win every battle and still lose the war if you forget why you are fighting in the first place. Martinez straightened his uniform. We fight to protect people, Commander. All people. Even our enemies when possible. That might seem soft to some, but it has made us very good at ending conflicts permanently. With that, Colonel Martinez saluted and left the briefing room. Zethkar stood alone, thinking about the day's events. In all his years of service, he had never met soldiers who seemed more concerned with protecting their enemies than defeating them. It made no tactical sense. But something in Colonel Martinez's eyes suggested that these humans understood something about warfare that the rest of the galaxy had missed. Time would tell if that understanding would make them valuable allies or spectacular failures. 3 weeks after the humans arrived at Nexus Station, the emergency alarms started screaming. Zethkar rushed to the command center where dozens of officers were working frantically at their stations. The main display showed a nightmare scenario unfolding at the Kepler 442 system. Report, Zethkar demanded as he took his position at the central command console. The Hive Collective has launched a massive assault on the border colonies, reported Communications Officer Vexty. Early estimates show at least 200 bioships attacking 3 populated worlds. They appeared without warning through some kind of dimensional rift. Zethkar's blood ran cold. The Hive Collective was the galaxy's worst nightmare. The insectoid race consumed everything in their path, turning entire worlds into breeding grounds for their endless swarms. Unlike other enemies who wanted territory or resources, the Hive simply wanted to feed and multiply. Casualty reports, he asked. Unknown. All communication from the colonies went dark 30 minutes ago. Vexty's voice was grim. High Command is mobilizing 3 battle groups for immediate deployment. Which battle groups? The 7th Fleet. Under Admiral Corkson, the Titan Heavy Assault Division, and... Vexty paused. The newly formed Terran Division under your command, sir. Zethkar felt a mix of excitement and dread. This would be the first real test of the human soldiers. In 3 weeks of training exercises, they had performed adequately, but nothing spectacular. They were competent, but not remarkable. Now they would face the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy. Sound general quarters. All ships prepare for immediate departure. Zethkar activated his personal communicator. Colonel Martinez, report to the command center immediately. Within minutes, the human commander arrived with Captain Brooks and several other officers. Martinez looked calm despite the chaos around him. Colonel, we are deploying to Kepler 442 to engage the Hive Collective. This will be your first combat mission with the Defense Force. Martinez nodded. What's the tactical situation? 3 worlds under attack. Unknown civilian casualties. Our job is to eliminate the Hive forces and secure the system. Zethkar pulled up the tactical display. The Hive uses bioships that can regenerate damage and swarm tactics that overwhelm traditional defensive formations. What about the people? On those worlds? Asked Captain Brooks. Evacuation is not possible during active combat operations, Lieutenant Krexta said firmly. Standard protocol is to eliminate the threat first, then assess civilian survivors. The human officers exchanged those looks again. Colonel Martinez studied the display carefully. How many people live in that system? Roughly 4 million across the 3 worlds, Zethkar replied. And how long do civilian populations typically survive Hive attacks? Zethkar hesitated. The Hive does not usually leave survivors. They consume all organic matter to fuel their reproduction cycles. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. Commander, I'd like to request a tactical modification to our mission parameters. What kind of modification? Split our forces. Half engage the Hive directly while the other half focuses on civilian evacuation. We can't save the worlds if there's no one left to save. Krexta's scales flashed angry red. That divides our strength. Against a superior enemy, it's tactical suicide. With respect, Lieutenant, letting 4 million people die while we have a chance to save them is worse than tactical suicide. It's moral suicide. Martinez turned back to Zethkar. Give us a chance, Commander. We know how to fight this kind of enemy. Zethkar found himself agreeing despite his better judgment. Something in Martinez's confidence was convincing. Very well, but if the situation becomes hopeless, evacuation forces will withdraw to assist the main battle. Understood, sir. The OW. Journey to Kepler 442 took 18 hours at maximum jump speed. During the trip, Zethkar observed the human preparations. While other species focused on weapons checks and battle formations, the humans spent time studying hive biology, colony layouts, and civilian population centers. Private Danny Chen worked with alien cultural experts to understand the evacuation needs of different species. Sergeant Ben Mitchell coordinated with medical teams to prepare for treating various alien injuries. When they arrived at Kepler 442, the sight was even worse than expected. The 3 colony worlds were covered in a dark, organic substance that pulsed with sickly light. Hive bioships swarmed around the planets like angry insects, their acid weapons leaving trails of green fire in space. My God, whispered Captain Brooks as she stared at the main display. 2 crystalline cruisers are already down, reported the sensor officer. The hive acid is eating through our standard energy shields. Zethkar watched the tactical display with growing concern. The 7th Fleet was taking heavy losses trying to maintain a defensive perimeter. The Titan Heavy Assault Division was struggling to close with the enemy as hive bioships swarmed around their massive but slow vessels. All ships, assume attack formation, Zethkar ordered. Engage the enemy. The human ships moved differently than the others. Instead of forming a straight battle line, they spread out in a complex pattern that seemed almost random. The frigate Defiance, commanded by Captain Brooks, suddenly broke away from the formation entirely. Captain Brooks, return to formation immediately, Zethkar commanded. Negative, sir, we're going to try something. Brooks's voice was steady but determined. Danny, are you ready with those cultural protocols? Ready, Captain. I've got refugee processing set up for 7 different species. Ben, how's our boarding party? Locked and loaded, ma'am. Ready to take some bug ships. Zethkar watched in amazement as the Defiance dove directly into the hive swarm. Instead of exchanging fire at long range like the other ships, the humans flew straight at a hive destroyer. At the last second, they fired magnetic grappling hooks and pulled themselves alongside the enemy vessel. "They're boarding a hive ship," Vexti reported in disbelief. "No one has ever successfully boarded a hive vessel, because no one has ever been crazy enough to try," Krexta muttered. On the tactical display, Zethkar could see human soldiers cutting through the hive ship's hull with plasma torches. Within minutes, they were inside the bioship, fighting room to room against hive warriors that were twice their size and armed with natural weapons that could cut through most armor. "Boarding party to Defiance," came Sergeant Mitchell's voice. Over the radio, "We've secured the navigation center. The bugs are falling back." "How is that possible?" Krexta demanded. "They're using close-quarters combat," Vexti reported. "The hive warriors are designed for long-range acid attacks in overwhelming numbers. In tight spaces, human tactics are more effective." But what happened next shocked everyone. Instead of destroying the hive ship, the humans began taking prisoners. They actually captured live hive warriors, something no one had ever done before. "Captain Brooks," Zethkar called over the communicator. "Why are you taking prisoners?" "Intel, sir. We need to understand their attack patterns to protect the civilians." Brooks's voice was calm despite the chaos. "Also, these hive soldiers are wounded. Danny's treating them." "Treating them?" Krexta's voice rose to a shriek. "They're the enemy." "They're injured," came Private Chen's voice. "I'm a medic. I treat injured people." Zethkar stared at the display in confusion. In the middle of the most dangerous battle the galaxy had seen in years, the humans were providing medical care to their enemies. It made no sense. But it was working. The captured hive ship was providing intelligence about the enemy fleet movements. The treated hive warriors were actually communicating with the humans, sharing information about civilian locations on the planets below. "Commander," Martinez's voice came over the radio. "We've got coordinates for survivor enclaves on all 3 worlds, requesting permission to begin evacuation operations." Zethkar looked at the tactical display. The battle was far from over, but the humans had somehow turned captured enemies into allies. It was impossible, but it was happening. "Permission granted, Colonel. Show us what humans can do." The battle for Kepler 442 lasted 6 days. By the end, Zethkar had seen things that changed his understanding of warfare forever. The humans had not only defeated the Hive Collective, they had done something no military strategist thought possible. They had convinced Hive warriors to help evacuate civilians, but that victory came with a terrible cost. Of the 300 humans who had joined the battle, only 97 were still alive. Colonel Martinez was in the medical bay with severe acid burns covering half his body. Captain Brooks had lost her left arm when a Hive bioship exploded next to the Defiance. Sergeant Mitchell would never walk again without mechanical assistance. Yet, when Zethkar visited the human survivors in the hospital ward, none of them seemed defeated. Private Chen, despite having his face scarred by hive acid, was still treating wounded aliens from a dozen different species. The humans had saved over 3 million civilians from the 3 worlds, including many who had been captured by the Hive for food processing. "Colonel Martinez," Zethkar said as he approached the human commander's bed. "How are you feeling?" Martinez tried to sit up but winced in pain. "Been better, Commander. How are the evacuation numbers looking?" 3.2 million civilians saved, the highest rescue percentage in Defense Force history. Zethkar paused. "Your people did the impossible. We did what needed to be done." Martinez looked out the window where refugee ships were still departing for safer systems. "That's what we do." 2 months later, Zethkar thought he understood human warfare. Then the situation at New Eden proved him wrong again. The agricultural world of New Eden was home to 12 million farmers, scientists, and their families. It produced food for 30 different systems and was considered one of the most peaceful places in the galaxy. When Hive scouts were detected in the system, High Command immediately began evacuation procedures. "At current transport capacity, we can evacuate 4 million people before the main Hive fleet arrives," reported Admiral Corkson during the emergency briefing. Standard protocol is to prioritize essential personnel and skilled workers. What about the other 8 million? Asked Colonel Martinez, who had returned to duty despite his injuries. They will have to take their chances planetside. We cannot risk our transport fleet against a full hive invasion force. Zethkar watched Martinez's face carefully. The human commander's expression didn't change, but something cold and dangerous appeared in his eyes. How long do we have before the hive arrives? Martinez asked. 48 hours, maybe less. And how long would it take to evacuate everyone? Admiral Corkson consulted his datapad. With every available transport in the sector, approximately 72 hours. But we would lose the entire transport fleet when the hive arrives. It's not tactically sound. Martinez stood up slowly. Admiral, what if the hive fleet never made it to New Eden? What do you mean? What if we intercepted them before they could reach the planet? Bought enough time for a complete evacuation? Lieutenant Krexta spoke up immediately. The hive fleet consists of over 400 bioships, including 3 motherships. Our combined forces have maybe 60 vessels. We would be completely outnumbered. Numbers aren't everything, said Captain Brooks, who had learned to use her new mechanical arm with impressive skill. This is madness, Admiral Corzin said firmly. I will not sacrifice 3 battle groups for 8 million civilians. The math doesn't work. Martinez looked directly at the Admiral. With respect, sir, you're thinking about this wrong. You're not sacrificing battle groups for civilians. You're using battle groups to save civilians. That's what they're for. The debate continued for hours. Most of the senior officers agreed with Admiral Corkson. Sacrificing the Defense Force fleet to save civilians made no strategic sense. The ships and trained crews were too valuable to lose, but the humans had a different plan. Captain Tony Rodriguez, the human fleet engineer, had spent weeks studying captured hive technology. Lieutenant Kate Williams, their alien biology expert, had interrogated dozens of hive prisoners from previous battles. Together, they had developed a strategy that made Zethkar's blood freeze. We're going to ram the motherships, Rodriguez explained to the assembled officers. Our ships are smaller and faster. If we can disable their main vessels, the smaller bioships will become confused and disorganized. You're talking about suicide attacks? Admiral Corkson said in horror. We're talking about buying time, Brooks corrected. Every hour we keep the hive busy is another 100,000 people evacuated. And what happens to your crews? Martinez answered quietly. We do our jobs, Admiral. We protect people. The Battle of New Eden began 36 hours later when hive scouts entered the system. The human ships immediately engaged, using hit-and-run tactics to draw the enemy away from the planet. Meanwhile, every available transport worked frantically to evacuate civilians. Zethkar commanded the operation from the flagship Stellar Dominion, watching in amazement as human tactics unfolded. The frigate Liberty, commanded by Captain Rodriguez, flew directly at a hive mothership, firing every weapon until the last second before impact. The explosion tore a massive hole in the bioship's side, causing it to release thousands of smaller vessels that had been stored inside. Rodriguez to fleet, came the captain's final transmission. Mothership disabled. Good luck, everyone. The destroyer Courage, under Captain Sarah Blake, followed minutes later. Instead of ramming, they used their ship as a giant explosive device, flying into the center of a hive swarm and detonating their entire missile payload at once. The blast destroyed dozens of enemy vessels, but also vaporized the Courage and everyone aboard. On the planet's surface, Sergeant Amy Foster held an impossible defensive position with just 20 soldiers. They were stationed at the main spaceport, protecting the evacuation ships from hive ground forces that had landed early. For 6 hours, Foster's small team fought against thousands of hive warriors, falling back step by step but never breaking. Foster to evacuation control, came her voice over the radio, calm despite the sounds of battle in the background. We're down to 8 people, but the ships are still loading. Send us everything you've got. Private Alex Thompson volunteered for the most dangerous job of all. When hive forces broke through the main defensive line, he stayed behind alone to hold a critical choke point. Armed with just a rifle and a few grenades, he held his position for 2 hours against endless waves of hive warriors. His final transmission was simple: "Tell my mom I did good." The battle lasted 18 hours. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found a system full of debris and empty transport ships heading for safety. New Eden's surface was scarred and burning, but every civilian had been evacuated. 12 million people were alive, because a few hundred humans had been willing to die for them. Of the human fleet that engaged the Hive, only 3 ships survived. The cruiser Defiance limped back to base with Captain Brooks and 40 crew members. The medical ship Mercy had stayed behind the battle lines, treating wounded from all species. The scout vessel Hope had spent the entire battle coordinating evacuations. That night, Zethkar sat in his quarters reading the casualty reports. 237 humans had died at New Eden. They had saved 12 million lives at War, the cost of their own. The mathematics of war said it was a good trade. But mathematics couldn't explain why Zethkar felt sick to his stomach. He thought about Private Thompson, barely 20 years old, holding a position alone against impossible odds. He thought about Captain Rodriguez flying his ship into certain death with a joke on his lips. He thought about Sergeant Foster, protecting strangers with her last breath. These humans fought differently than anyone else in the galaxy. They didn't fight for territory or resources or even survival. They fought for an idea that everyone deserved: to live free, even if it cost them everything. For the first time in 32 years of military service, Zethkar questioned whether he was fighting for the right reasons. After the Battle of New Eden, Zethkar could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw human ships flying into certain death to save people they had never met. He saw Private Thompson standing alone against an army of monsters. He saw Captain Rodriguez laughing over the radio as he crashed his ship into a Hive mother vessel. 3 days after the battle, Zethkar found himself in the archives, reading human military history. What he discovered there changed everything he thought he knew about warfare. The humans had rules they followed even during their worst conflicts. They called them the Geneva Conventions. These rules said that soldiers must treat prisoners well, protect civilians, and care for wounded enemies. Any human soldier who broke these rules could be punished by their own military. Zethkar read about human soldiers who had refused orders that would harm innocent people. He learned about medics, who treated enemy wounded even while being shot at. He discovered that humans regularly court-martialed their own officers for war crimes, something no other species in the galaxy did. But the most shocking thing was what humans did after they won wars. Instead of enslaving the defeated peoples or taking their resources, humans helped rebuild what had been destroyed. They sent food, medicine, and teachers to their former enemies. They actually made their defeated foes stronger than before. "It makes no sense," Zethkar muttered to himself. "How did they ever win any wars?" "Because we understand something others don't," said a voice behind him. Zethkar turned to see Colonel Martinez standing in the archive doorway. The human commander looked tired and was still healing from his injuries, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Colonel, I didn't hear you come in." "Mind if I sit? These old bones aren't what they used to be." Martinez settled into a chair across from Zethkar. "What are you reading about?" "Your species' approach to warfare. I'm trying to understand how." "You think?" Martinez nodded. "And what have you learned?" "That you fight wars in the most inefficient way possible. You follow rules that help your enemies. You risk everything to save people who can't help you win. You treat defeated foes better than most species treat their allies." Zethkar looked directly at Martinez. "How did your species survive long enough to reach the stars?" Martinez smiled sadly. "Because we learned something important a long time ago. The way you fight a war determines what kind of peace you get afterward." "I don't understand. Let me tell you a story." Martinez leaned back in his chair. "On our world, we fought a terrible war about 80 years ago. Millions died. Cities were destroyed. When it was over, the winning side had a choice. They could punish the losers, take their land, make them pay for the damage. Instead, they helped rebuild everything. They shared food and medicine. They even helped their former enemies become stronger than before." "That seems foolish." "Maybe, But those former enemies became our strongest allies. When we faced new threats, they fought beside us. When we needed help exploring space, they shared their technology. The peace we built after that war lasted longer than most species' entire civilizations. Zethkar thought about this. So you show mercy to create allies? No. That's still thinking, like a strategist. Martinez shook his head. We show mercy because it's right. Sometimes it helps us, sometimes it doesn't. But it's always right. The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alarm. Zethkar and Martinez rushed to the command center where Lieutenant Krexta was coordinating response to a new crisis. What's the situation? Zethkar demanded. We've discovered a hive processing facility on Rigel 7. Intelligence suggests they have thousands of prisoners from dozens of different worlds. Krexta's scales showed his excitement for battle. High Command wants us to destroy the facility before they can transport the prisoners to breeding worlds. Destroy it? Martinez stepped forward. What about the prisoners? Rescue operations would be too dangerous. The facility is heavily defended and the prisoners are likely being held in the deepest parts of the complex. A direct assault would trigger automatic execution protocols. Krexta pulled up tactical displays. Better to destroy everything quickly, then let the hive use those people for reproduction. Zethkar studied the display. The facility was indeed heavily defended, with bioships patrolling constantly and ground-based acid weapons covering all approaches. Any rescue attempt would be nearly impossible. There has to be another way, Martinez said quietly. There isn't, Krexta replied firmly. Sometimes hard choices must be made for the greater good. The greater good? Martinez's voice was cold. The greater good is saving those people, not abandoning them. Colonel, I understand your feelings, but we must be realistic, Admiral Corxon said as he entered the command center. We cannot risk our forces on an impossible rescue mission. Martinez looked at the tactical display for a long time. Finally, he turned to Zethkar. Commander, I formally request permission to attempt a rescue mission with volunteer forces only. Request. Denied, Admiral Corxon said immediately. I will not authorize a suicide mission. Then I'm resigning my commission. Martinez began removing his rank insignia. As a civilian, I'm free to take whatever action I think is right. Jake, no, Captain Brooks said as she entered the command center. You can't do this alone. I'm not alone. Martinez looked around the room. Any human who wants to come with me is welcome. Anyone who wants to stay is welcome to do that too. This isn't an order, it's a choice. Within an hour, every surviving human soldier had volunteered for the mission. They were joined by medics from 6 different species, engineers who had worked with the humans before, and even some Titan warriors who had learned to respect human tactics. But what shocked Zethkar most was when Lieutenant Krexta approached him privately. Sir, I want to join the rescue mission. You? But you said it was impossible. Krexta's scales showed unusual colors that Zethkar had never seen before. I've been watching these humans for months. They do impossible things regularly. Maybe it's time I learned how. The rescue mission launched that night. Instead of a direct assault, the humans used their standard approach. They captured a hive patrol ship, treated the wounded warriors, and convinced them to provide intelligence about the facility's layout. They used stealth and precision instead of overwhelming force. Medic Paul Johnson worked for 3 days straight, treating prisoners from dozens of different worlds. Some had been tortured, others were sick from poor conditions, and many were barely alive. Johnson treated them all with the same careful attention, regardless of their species or condition. The rescue was successful. Over 8,000 prisoners were freed, including families that had been separated for months. But what impressed Zethkar most was what happened afterward. The humans didn't just rescue the prisoners. They helped them find their families, provided medical care for months of recovery, and even helped some of them find new homes when their original worlds had been destroyed. Private Chen spent his own salary buying medicine for a group of orphaned, alien children who had no one else to care for them. That night, Zethkar sat in his quarters writing his resignation letter. I have served the Galactic Defense Force for 32 years, he wrote. I have fought beside warriors from across the galaxy and learned much about courage, strategy, and duty. But I have never seen anything like human courage. They do not fight because they enjoy war. They fight because they love peace. They do not show strength through conquest. They show strength through sacrifice. He paused, thinking about everything he had witnessed. These humans have taught me that the purpose of strength is not to defeat your enemies, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves. They have shown me that the highest form of courage is not dying for your beliefs, but living for them every single day. I am not worthy to command such beings. Zethkar finished the letter and prepared to submit it to High Command. Tomorrow he would book passage to Earth. If he was going to continue fighting, it would be alongside people who understood that winning a war meant more than just defeating your enemies. It meant saving everyone you could, including the enemies themselves. 3 days later, Zethkar stood on the transport dock, wearing civilian clothes and carrying a single bag. Colonel Martinez was there to see him off. "Are you sure about this, Commander?" Martinez asked. "I'm sure. You humans have shown me what real strength looks like. I want to learn more." Martinez extended his hand in the human greeting gesture. "Welcome to the fight, Zethkar. We're glad to have you on the side of everyone who just wants to go home." As the transport prepared to depart for Earth, Zethkar looked back at Nexus, Station 1 last time. He was leaving behind everything he had known for 32 years, but he was also moving toward something better. He was joining the side that fought for everyone,